Today's video features 3 bizarre stories about people who committed murders while they were dressed as or pretending to be Santa Claus. However, before that, we want to bring you a message from our amazing sponsor, Magellan TV. Are you still looking for a unique and thoughtful gift? Why not give someone the gift of knowledge by giving them a Magellan TV gift card? Magellan TV is an awesome streaming service that has over 2,000 documentaries in a bunch of different genres like biography, science and tech, and ancient history. My favorite is their crime and mystery documentaries. A fascinating documentary you can find on Magellan TV is Arctic Manhunt: Hunt for the Mad Trapper. It details the investigation into the identity of a mysterious fugitive who had killed 3 police officers. Another great documentary is Trafficking Pills, which is an astonishing look at the global black market pill trade. These are just 2 of the great documentaries on Magellan TV, and they add new material every week. The documentaries are ad-free, and there are some stunning documentaries that are available in 4K. Magellan TV is also easy to access. You can watch it on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play, Apple TV, and iOS, or simply cast from your phone to your TV. Magellan TV is offering criminally listed viewers a free month, so go to magellantv.com/criminally listed and check it out for yourself. If you give someone Magellan TV as a gift, you're not just giving them something unique and useful, but you'll also be supporting criminally listed. Number 3. Georges Marcotte. Today, Saint Laurent is a borough of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. In 1962, it was its own town. The residents are predominantly French-speaking. On December 14, 1962, a man wearing a hood entered a bank branch of CIBC. He was armed with a carbine. In English, he told everyone to get down. He then went and stood at the door of the manager's office. A second man, armed with a revolver, had followed him into the bank, and he went behind the teller's desk. By that time, one of the tellers had triggered the silent alarm. Then, a man dressed as Santa Claus and who was wearing sunglasses walked into the bank. He was carrying an FN 308 semi-automatic rifle. The second man who came into the bank, who went behind the teller's desk, was having difficulties getting the money from each of the teller's drawers. So the man who was dressed like Santa Claus forced the bank manager to take him to the vault. Once the man who was dressed as Santa was in the vault, he started loading money into his bag. Saint Laurent police constables Claude Marino and Denis Brabron were on duty that afternoon. Marino was supposed to have the day off, and he had planned to go Christmas shopping with his family. But the shopping trip had to be postponed, so he decided to fill in for someone at work. When the call came in that an alarm had been sounded at the CIBC branch, they were test driving an ambulance that the police department had recently purchased. Something about the call may have struck Marino's attention. Marino had been born in a farmhouse that once stood where the bank was now built. Nevertheless, they took the call. When they pulled up to the bank, the robber, who was disguised as Santa Claus, was putting his bag of money into a getaway car. He saw the ambulance, and he opened fire. Santa shot Marino in the chest while he was sitting in the driver's seat. Brabron got out of the ambulance, and he was shot nearly immediately after he stepped out. He was shot in the thigh, so he fell to the ground. He got out on the passenger side, so the ambulance was between him and the armed man who was dressed as Santa Claus. The man in the Santa suit got down and fired under the ambulance. He walked around the ambulance and then fired at Brabron as he laid on the ground. One of the other robbers got into the driver's seat of the getaway car, and then Santa got into the passenger seat. Then they drove off. The third robber ran into a nearby field. More police arrived at the scene minutes later, and they called in an ambulance. Denis Barbrant was rushed to the hospital, but the 30-year-old father of two died within an hour. 34-year-old Claude Marino, father of three, was pronounced dead at the scene. He died just feet away from the spot where he was born. In total, Santa Claus and his accomplices got away with about $6,500 in cash and an additional $133,000 in bonds and traveler's checks. The next day, the getaway car with a Santa suit and about $64,000 worth of bonds that were non-negotiable was found abandoned. The next day, the getaway car was found abandoned. The car had been stolen from a garage nearly 2 weeks earlier. The license plates had been swapped out with some plates that were taken off a car in a scrapyard. On December 21st, 1962, a week after the robbery, a 30-year-old man named Jules Reeves was brought into the emergency room at one of Montreal's hospitals. He had been found unconscious in his room in a rooming house. Reeves had suffered a blood clot in his brain because he had taken too many barbiturates. This had left him in a coma. 2 nights after he was brought to the ER, a man came to the hospital to see him. He claimed he was Reeves' brother. He wanted to collect his clothes and the money he had on him. One of the nurses who was on duty refused to hand over the clothes and the money, so the man left. After he left, she called the police, and some officers came to the hospital. They looked in the pockets of the man's clothes, and they found $1,297. They compared the serial numbers on the bills to the bills stolen from the bank, and they were a match. So while the police had found one of the Santa Claus bandits, because of Reeves' physical state, he could not identify his accomplices. The room where he was crashing did not contain any clues as to the identity of his accomplices. The police would not find out who his accomplices were until January 11, 1963, 4 weeks after the deadly heist. On that day, a man called the police and explained that he was married to a woman, but he was also in a sexual relationship with a man. The man had 2 friends, and they were planning a bank robbery. The caller said that the 3 men wanted him to do the robbery with them, but he had turned them down. Then his wife found out that he was in the relationship with the man. She gave him an ultimatum. He had to choose her or the man he was having an affair with. The man decided to stay with his wife, and to show his dedication to her, he wanted to turn the men in. He said that one of the men was Jules Reeves. The other 2 men were 34-year-old Georges Marcotte and 39-year-old Jean-Paul Fournel. It turned out that Marcotte was already in police custody. On December 19th, 5 days after the robbery, he had been arrested after he tried to force his way into his friend's home with a revolver. He was charged with possession of a revolver. While he was awaiting trial, he tried to hang himself in his jail cell, but he was cut down by his cellmate and he survived. Marcotte claimed he was having problems at home. He also said he was having a difficult time with life since he had been released from the penitentiary 5 months earlier. He was even questioned about the Santa Claus bank heist, but the interviewing officer did not think he seemed like a likely culprit. The officer thought that Marcotte was just a revolver guy, and he did not think he would commit a crime with a semi-automatic rifle. After the police talked to the man on the phone, officers went to Jean-Paul Fournel's apartment and arrested him. In Fournel's car, they found the rifle that was used by Santa Claus to kill the two police officers. A week later, there was a coroner's inquest. At the inquest, Fournel confessed to everything. He said that he was the robber who ran into the field, and Jules Reeves was the one who ended up driving the car away from the robbery. He said that Georges Marcotte was Santa Claus. All three men were charged with murder. Jules Reeves was deemed unfit to stand trial. Because of the blood clot, Reeves was disabled, and he was eventually placed in an institution. Georges Marcotte went to trial first in February 1963, about 2 months after the robbery. Marcotte had always maintained his innocence, and he pleaded not guilty. Marcotte was found guilty, and he was sentenced to be hanged a few months later on May 31st. He was later given a stay of execution. In June 1964, Jean-Paul Fournel pleaded guilty to armed robbery, and he was given a life sentence. In October 1973, Jules Reeves, who was still in an institution, had a heart attack and died. In 1976, Canada abolished the death penalty, and Marcotte's death sentence was commuted to life in prison. 5 years later, in 1981, Marcotte was paroled. When he got out of prison, he changed his name to Albert Georges Duvivier, and he moved to Ontario. Duvivier was involved in minor crimes, and he was sent back to prison several times. Between 1993 and 2002, he was only allowed out of the prison on day parole. After that, he was granted full parole. It's unclear what happened to him after he was granted full parole. When he was granted full parole, he would have been in his early 70s. If Albert Georges Duvivier is still alive at the time of this video, he would be in his late 80s. Number 2. George Gares. In December 1921, Teresa Kuharski was 5 years old. She lived in New Brunswick, New Jersey with her mother, Letty, and her younger sister. Her father, Adolf, had been arrested several months earlier because he had been accused of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old girl. After he was arrested, Letty got the bail money from a bail bondsman. After Letty posted the bail, Adolf fled. This left Letty responsible for paying the bail bondsman in addition to supporting their 2 daughters. Letty ran a tap room in a flophouse called the Belmore. The problem was that Prohibition had started 2 years earlier, and Letty's bar was illegal. In the autumn of 1921, a judge had ordered the police to shut down her tap room. But on December 22, 1921, Letty was still open. Letty and her 2 daughters lived in one of the rooms in the flophouse. At some point that night, Letty went upstairs to tend to her youngest daughter. While she did, 5-year-old Teresa stayed in the bar room. The bartender was watching her, but then she had to step away from the bar for a few minutes. A man with a white beard who was drinking moonshine struck up a conversation with Teresa. He then fixed her toy monkey. Teresa asked the man with the beard if he was Santa Claus. After all, it was only 3 days before Christmas. The man said he was Santa Claus. In reality, he was 54-year-old George Gares, pictured here without his beard. George had immigrated to the United States from Germany, and he traveled around working as a carpenter. Earlier that year, George had been arrested for sexually assaulting a 6-year-old boy in a park. That summer, George went to trial and he was acquitted. George told Teresa that he had a present for her, but it was in his room at a different hotel. George offered to take her to his room, and she accepted his offer. George and Teresa were seen skipping down the road to a rundown hotel called the Hotel Albany. When they got to the hotel, George told the owner of the hotel that the girl was his granddaughter. George then took Teresa to his room on the 3rd floor, where he had been staying for the past 2 months. About 2 hours later, George left the hotel alone. Several hours later, the owner of the hotel went to the 3rd floor. He went to a closet to get a broom, and he found a suitcase in the closet. He saw some blonde hair sticking out of the suitcase. He got curious and decided to look in the suitcase. Inside, he found the body of a little girl. He alerted the police, and officers came to the hotel. They were quickly able to determine that it was the body of 5-year-old Teresa Kaharski. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. George Gares instantly became a wanted man, and not just by the police. A large group of men formed a posse. The posse vowed if they found him, they were going to kill him. So the police felt that they needed to find George first for his own safety. The police went to visit George Gares' wife, who lived in Elizabeth, New Jersey. She said that she hadn't seen him in over a year. After the officers pressed her, she said that he might be at his brother's cabin in some woods just outside of Dayton, New Jersey. On Christmas Eve, the police surrounded the cabin. They burst in while George and his brother, Sylvester, were sleeping. Sylvester was arrested as a material witness. Sylvester swore he had no idea that George was a suspect in a murder. George denied killing Teresa. After George was arrested and his photograph was printed in the newspaper, 2 men got in contact with the police. They wanted to talk about an incident that happened 2 months earlier. On October 25th, 7-year-old Stella Ostrowski went missing while she was out for recess at her school in Fresh Ponds, New Jersey. Large search parties were formed, and the 2 men who had just got in contact with the police were searchers. Stella's body was found about a month after she went missing in a field about 4 miles from the school. A doctor who examined the remains thought that Stella had died from exposure and hunger. The police concluded that Stella's death was a tragic accident. During that recess, Stella had knocked a boy over. The boy's brother became angry, and he chased Stella with a stick. Stella ran into the woods behind the schoolhouse. The police thought that when people started looking for Stella, She may have thought that the boy she knocked down was seriously hurt. She may have avoided the searchers, fearing that she was going to get in trouble. She then most likely got lost and later died from exposure and starvation. The two men who got in contact with the police said that they searched for Stella the day after she went missing. While they were searching a swamp that was a couple of miles from the school, they found a man lying on the ground. The man was very drunk. They asked the man what he was doing, and he struggled to communicate. The drunk man spoke in English and German, and the only thing that the men could make out was that he said, "I lose my landsman." The two men swore that the drunk man was George Gares. They thought that George may have been heading to his brother's cabin and he got lost. When they found George lying on the ground, he was close to his brother Sylvester's cabin. It also turned out that they weren't far from where Stella's body would be found a month later. In fact, Stella's body was found only 1.5 miles away from Sylvester's cabin. George was questioned about Stella's death, but he adamantly denied having anything to do with it. Sadly, Teresa Kaharski and Stella Ostrowski were not the only young girls to die unnatural deaths in New Jersey in the latter part of 1921. On October 6, 12-year-old Jeanette Lawrence, who is sometimes referred to as Janet, was babysitting in Madison, New Jersey. After she finished babysitting, she started walking home alone. When she didn't arrive home, her brother went to the house where she had been babysitting. The family told him that Jeanette had left an hour earlier. Her brother went home and people started searching the neighborhood. Jeanette's body was found in the woods across the street from her family's home. A large handkerchief had been tied around her neck and she had been stabbed 24 times. There were signs that she had been sexually assaulted, or at least the killer attempted to sexually assault her. The police had suspects, but no one had been convicted of her murder. When Stella went missing several weeks later, people thought that her disappearance and Stella's murder were connected. Then Stella's body was found a month after she went missing, and since it didn't appear that she was murdered, the police dropped the idea that the two cases were linked. But then the two men came forward and said that they encountered George Gares near the area where Stella's body was found. So the police started to reconsider Stella's cause of death. After all, she was found a month after she went missing, and her body was severely decomposed. Her clothes were used to identify her. The police began to wonder if the doctor got the wrong cause of death because of the state of the remains. But in the end, the police did not do much more investigating into Stella's death after George Gares was arrested. They already had a strong case against him for Teresa Kaharski's murder. Also, George denied being involved in Stella's death. And finally, Stella's case was closed because her death had been ruled an accident. While it was thought that Stella and Jeanette's cases were connected, the police could not link George to the murder of Jeanette. The police reasoned that if George did kill Stella and/or Jeanette, at the very least he would be convicted of Teresa's murder and he would never be able to hurt anyone else ever again. George Gares ended up going to trial for Teresa Kaharski's murder on January 4th, 1922, 11 days after he was arrested. George said that he did not kill Teresa. He said that if he did not remember doing it because he was too drunk. Several people testified that they saw George with Teresa on the night she was murdered. One witness testified that he had heard George tell Teresa that he was Santa Claus. George's trial lasted for a day and a half. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes and returned with a verdict of guilty. George Gares was sentenced to die in the electric chair. Just after 8 o'clock on February 7, 1922, about a month after he was convicted, George Gares was strapped into the electric chair. At 8:08, the electric chair was turned on. Electricity started to course through George's body. But then, the chair started to fire off sparks. It turned out that a wire had become loose. The power to the chair was turned off so that it could be fixed. While it was being repaired, George convulsed and struggled to breathe. After a few minutes, the chair was fixed and it was turned back on. At 8:13 p.m., 54-year-old George Gares was pronounced dead. The doctor who was at the execution did not think that George was in any pain during the delay when the chair was being fixed. The doctor thought that the first jolt of electricity would have rendered him unconscious. Today, it's unclear if George Gares was involved in the deaths of Stella Ostrowski and Jeanette Lawrence. Two men were ultimately arrested for the murder of Jeanette Lawrence. One was a greenhouse worker named Frank Janik. A former co-worker said that Janik had confessed to him. Janik was indicted and he went to trial in April 1922. The only evidence against him was the testimony of his former co-worker who said he confessed. It turned out that the man had been fired from the greenhouse and Janik brother owned the greenhouse. So Janik lawyer argued that the man told the police that Janik confessed to get revenge for being fired. His lawyer also pointed out that the police had another suspect, a 14-year-old boy named Francis Cluxon. Francis had been arrested the day after the murder, but they did not end up charging him. The jury found Frank Janik not guilty. After Janik trial, Francis Cluxon was indicted for murder. Francis, who was now 15, went to trial in July 1922. There was some evidence against him, but it was all circumstantial. Francis was a neighbor of Jeanette's. When Francis was questioned by the police, he said that he didn't know Jeanette well. However, other witnesses said that Francis and Jeanette had often played together. Francis also had a bad reputation. Sometime before Jeanette was murdered, Francis had been expelled from school because of his behavior. Francis admitted that he was in the forest around the time that Stella was killed. He said he was doing some target practice with his gun quite a distance away from the crime scene. When Jeanette was attacked, she was wearing a hat. In the hat, the police found a handkerchief. The letter F was embroidered on the handkerchief. Since Francis starts with an F, the police thought that the handkerchief might have been his. The police had searched Francis's family's property. They found some of Francis's clothes soaking in a bucket. The clothes had remnants of dark red stains on them. The police thought that the stains were blood. But Francis's family owned and operated a winery. Francis had been working at the winery ever since he got kicked out of school. He said that the stains were red wine. That was all the evidence the district attorney had. They never found the murder weapon, and they did not find any blood in Francis's home. Francis testified on his own behalf, and he denied committing the murder. The jury found him credible. He was ultimately acquitted of murder. A 49-year-old man named Monel Sayer saw Francis at his trial, and he was impressed by the young man. Monel was a rich, childless bachelor. After the trial, Monel persuaded Francis's parents to let him adopt Francis so that Francis could inherit his fortune. When he was adopted, Francis took on the surname Sayer. Monel and Francis eventually moved to Princeton, New Jersey, because people were suspicious of their lifestyle. Francis moved out of Monel's home in 1926. In 1927, Francis joined the Marines. In the winter of 1932, Francis was 26 years old, and he was living in San Diego, California. On Christmas Day 1932, Francis attacked two men with a butcher knife during a robbery. Both men were cut up pretty badly, but they survived the attack. Francis was fined $50, and he was given a 6-month suspended sentence. 6 months later, in June 1933, Francis was arrested again. At the time, Francis was living in a rooming house in San Diego. Joe Holloman was a watchman for the building next to Francis's rooming house. On June 15th, the police were called to Francis's home because he had shot Holloman with a shotgun. When they arrived, they found Holloman lying dead on the floor, and a gun was in one of his hands. Francis said that he killed Holloman in self-defense. Francis told the police that Holloman had been drinking earlier that day in his room with him, his girlfriend, and his friend. But eventually, they had to kick Holloman out. A little bit later, Holloman came back to Francis's room, where he found Francis's girlfriend and his friend. Francis was not in the room at the time. Holloman was supposedly armed with a gun, and he was firing wildly. Francis said that he managed to get the shotgun, and then he shot Holloman to save everyone. Francis's girlfriend and his friend backed up his story. The grand jury chose not to indict Francis for murder because they thought he acted in self-defense. Less than a year later, in April 1934, Francis was arrested yet again. This time, it was in connection with a dozen robberies and a string of cattle murders. Over $1,000 worth of stolen items were found in his home. Also, animal blood and hair was found in Francis's car. Francis pleaded guilty to theft. He ended up serving a stint in prison. Then it appeared that Francis stayed out of legal trouble for the rest of his life. Francis Sayer, formerly Francis Cluxon, died in 1971. If he had anything to do with the murder of Jeanette Lawrence, he took that secret to the grave with him. Because of his later criminal activity, people believe that he was the one who killed Jeanette. Other people do not think that he was responsible, and he was only charged because the police were desperate to convict anyone of the crime. If Francis didn't kill her, did George Gares kill her? After all, George was convicted of killing Teresa Kowarski, and he was seen not far from where Stella Ostrowski's body was eventually found. It was also thought that Stella and Jeanette's deaths were connected. Madison, where Jeanette was killed, is only about 45 miles from George's brother's cabin. George also traveled around for work. Perhaps what is most damning is that the child murders in New Jersey stopped after George was arrested. But unfortunately, we'll probably never know who killed Jeanette Lawrence. Also, we'll probably never know if Stella Roski's death was truly an accident or a murder. Number 1. Aziz Yazdanpanah. By the winter of 2011, 56-year-old Aziz Yazdanpanah and 55-year-old Fatemeh Ramadi had been married for 24 years. Together, they had 2 children, Nona, who was 19, and Ali, who was 15. For years, they lived in Colleyville, which is a suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. Life was not always easy for the family. In 1996, Aziz pleaded guilty to filing a false income tax return. He was given 3 years of probation, plus he was fined $1,000, and he was ordered to pay over $30,000 in restitution. 3 years later, Aziz and Fatemeh were forced to file for bankruptcy. Aziz had worked in real estate. By around 2007, he stopped working. Despite all their financial trouble, and even though Fatemeh had a state cosmetology license, Aziz would not allow her to work. But after Aziz stopped working, the bills started to pile up, and Fatemeh had to get a job. In fact, she got 2 jobs. Unfortunately, she was not generating enough income to support the family's lifestyle. In the summer of 2010, their home was nearing foreclosure. Fatemeh ended up filing for bankruptcy again. In March 2011, Fatemeh and the couple's 2 children, Nona and Ali, moved into an apartment in Grapevine, which is another suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth. Supposedly, when they left Aziz, their house had no power or running water. After Fatemeh moved out, she told Aziz that she would be filing for divorce, and Aziz did not take the news well. 8 months after the couple split up, Fatemeh was hosting Christmas morning at her apartment. Besides her 2 children, Nona and Ali, Fatemeh's sister, 58-year-old Zohreh Ramadi, her husband, 59-year-old Mohammed Hossein Zohreh, and their 22-year-old daughter, Sarah, were also there. Then finally, Aziz was there. It's unclear if he was invited or if he just showed up. Nevertheless, he was wearing a Santa Claus suit. Just before 11 a.m., Sarah sent a text message to her friend. It reads, "So we're here. We just got here, and my uncle is here too, dressed as Santa. Awesome." Then, at 11:15 a.m., she sent a text message that reads, "Now he wants to be all fatherly and win Father of the Year." At 11:34 a.m., the following call came into 911.
Grapevine 911, where is your emergency? Hello, Grapevine 911. Do you need help? Are you sick? What was that? Do you need an ambulance or police? Hello? One moment. I was getting heavy breathing on the phone and I was trying to talk to myself. Please send it.
Police officers were sent to the apartment and they found a gruesome scene. There were open presents and torn gift wrapping throughout the living room. Among the gifts and the wrapping paper were 7 dead bodies. The police concluded that Aziz was responsible for the mass murder. They think that when the family had finished unwrapping their gifts, he pulled out 2 guns from his Santa suit and he started shooting. His daughter, 19-year-old Nona, his 15-year-old son, Ali, his 22-year-old niece, Sarah, and his sister-in-law, 58-year-old Zoe, had all been shot in the head multiple times. His wife, 55-year-old Fatime, had been shot once in the head. Finally, his brother-in-law, 59-year-old Mohammed, was shot multiple times in the stomach, chest, and head. It appears that Aziz caught them all off guard. After Aziz killed his family, he called 911. He then shot himself in the head. The second gun used in the shooting was found in Mohammed's hand. The police think that Aziz planted the gun to make it look like Mohammed was the one who committed the massacre. But the police were quickly able to determine that Mohammed was one of the 6 victims. Tests were conducted and it showed that Mohammed did not fire a gun. Also, Mohammed had been shot with both guns. The police are not exactly sure why Aziz tried to frame Mohammed. One theory is that in the aftermath, Aziz wanted to look like a victim rather than a cold-blooded mass murderer. Another possibility was that Aziz planned on framing his brother-in-law and then he was going to leave the crime scene. Something may have gone wrong, or Aziz may have been overcome with guilt and he took his own life instead of leaving the scene. However, we'll probably never know what Aziz had planned to do. We'll also probably never know why he did it, but there are plenty of theories. One theory is that he was unhappy that his wife and children were doing well without him. He may have also wanted to target his in-laws, Zaray and Mohammed. Supposedly, Mohammed and Aziz used to go on trips together. On these trips, they would meet up with sex workers in hotel rooms. Apparently, Mohammed had told his wife that Aziz used to do that, but he did admit to doing it himself. There is some speculation that Zaray told Fatime about Aziz's repeated infidelities with sex workers, and it led to her splitting up with Aziz. Aziz also did not like how much influence Zaray and Mohammed had over his wife and children. According to some friends of the couple, Aziz thought that Zaray and Mohammed were stealing his family. As to why Aziz chose to kill everyone on Christmas morning is also a mystery. There is some speculation that Aziz's feelings were hurt when he wasn't invited to Mohammed's Christmas Eve party the night before. But again, this is speculation because the only person who knew what was running through Aziz's head was Aziz himself, and he cannot answer any questions. Sadly, the Grapevine Christmas Day Massacre is just another senseless mass murder. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please check out criminallist.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/criminallylisted. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.